Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our exercise prescription, our Exercise Rx program. We host these monthly with the Inova Parkinson's and Movement Disorders Center. Today, we're going to be talking about the best exercise for voice and speech, okay, and ways we can address it for people with Parkinson's. I'm John Dean. I'm a speech language pathologist. I've been specializing in Parkinson's for about 20 years. And I've joined Josefa Domingos. He's a physiotherapist, also been specializing exclusively in Parkinson's since 2004.
Hello, everyone. John was with a message from Guatemala. Hello to you.
Yes.
It's wonderful to see everyone from all around.
Yes.
And we hope that we can help with some key messages today in our program.
And so I always like to start these off by kind of giving us your best overview. If I had 30 seconds to tell someone the most important things about exercising for voice and speech, I would say that first and foremost, it has to be an exercise directed towards your specific issue. So if it's quiet voice, okay. If it's harsh sounding or fatigue, but it has to be directed towards the actual problem. And I think that means that you should probably start with an SLP evaluation, a speech language pathology evaluation, and then do therapy if you need to. Warm-ups and brief routines would be a great way to get you back in shape if you're getting ready to communicate really quickly, and we'll go over a couple of those things. And then understanding triggers, things that make it better or things that make it worse. These are all ways to kind of optimize your ability to communicate throughout the day. So today's program, we're going to cover kind of two sections. We're going to start with key issues that are involved, what people are feeling, what they're dealing with in their day-to-day, and we get that from the surveys. Thank you so much for filling those out. That really helps us out. We'll talk a little bit, I'll keep it very high level on the anatomy and some of the things that are involved in that. And then we'll get into what are the best exercises to address those problems. So coming from the survey, we had quite a number of answers, and probably the most common thing that we heard, and it's what I would expect as a speech therapist, 16 people out of 24 mentioned that they had quiet voice. Hypophonia is that term that we use in speech therapy land. And it's a very common problem, but it's not the only problem, because many people had a situation where the voice became weaker throughout the day, or maybe they had a situation where they were having more difficulty when they were talking longer. And that usually means that you're using your voice in a way that's straining or stressful to counteract the problems that are probably showing up from Parkinson's. Slurring and imprecise speech, that can be an issue. It's not the hallmark of Parkinson's, but it surely shows up. It can often show up after having DBS as well. And then there'll be factors like singing range has changed, or tightness, that's probably a dystonia. We won't get into all that, but there's a wide range. The most common issue is the quiet speech, the hypophonia. That's probably what I see 9 times out of 10. When we asked people what their family was saying about it, we got some very insightful information. And personally, people saying that, hey, I'm talking too softly, I need to face them and speak up to be intelligible. That's great advice. That's probably someone who may have worked with a speech language pathologist, because being louder is important. Obviously, facing your communication partner is a great way to make sure that you're able to give them the information. You would be amazed at how much information we transmit with our eyes and people looking at your lips. It really gives us a lot of information. And then speaking up, being loud like that. Now, the second person says, my voice is quiet, my speech is fast, so it's difficult to understand. That fast kind of running speech is a particular kind of problem in Parkinson's called palallalia, or festinating speech. And we'll talk about that a little bit, but it's not as common, but it will be something that you will definitely want to address. Someone saying that you're mumbling or he can't hear you. I mean, those are the kind of things that I think people deal with day in and out when they have this problem over and over, but it can be a little bit jarring to hear that sometimes, a little bit harsh. And as a result, some people, when they're responding to how that made them feel, sometimes it can make you feel unsure of yourself and not confident to speak up, and maybe I'm mixed up, or maybe I'm not really as involved in this conversation as I want to be. Disappointed, frustrated. We hear this a lot. This is the things you want to try to get your speech therapy to work to get away from, so that you can get better at this. This one here that says, unsure how much to remind them I have a disability. I hear that. That's a real frustrating thing, because you probably have said, hey, I'm having these problems. Now, I will say that the treatment for a lot of these issues It can be very effective. We have pretty good research on it, much better than some other things out in the world for rehab. And so it's something that if you're dealing with that a lot and you haven't done speech therapy, you're probably someone that should go in, because we could probably touch you up, and then also maybe have a conversation with the family about how to be sensitive to the fact that it's not perfect. So just at a very high level, I'm not going to get too deep into the science here, but just to talk a little bit about why there are changes in speech, I want to talk a little bit about Parkinson's, right? Because Parkinson's is characterized by some muscle tightness, some rigidity, as we call that, some stiffness, and that can be in a certain area. It's usually a knee or an elbow or some kind of joint. That can also happen in any of the structures that are involved with speech. So if you're not getting enough mobility of your rib cage, you're not going to get quite the amount of breath support. Maybe the diaphragm is not firing entirely. You're not going to have enough breath support, and that's going to influence and make your voice quieter. Similarly, if you have slowness, the bradykinesia that they call that in Parkinson's land, that slowness will throw off your ability to time certain movements, and that might come with that imprecise articulation people were talking about before. Your tongue's not getting back to the front of your back of your front teeth to make T sound really clearly, and it comes off sounding a little distorted. And then tremor can be a factor. I would say tremor is not the overwhelming or overriding factor in Parkinson's, but it can definitely be present. Obviously, Parkinson's, really anything can happen, and you shouldn't rule anything out until you've really tried to address it. So what I always say is anything that you can see externally is happening internally for Parkinson's, and that means it's going to influence your speech in that way. And what that ends up looking like when you start getting into the actual parts of voice and speech is you have the quiet speech, the hypophonia we talked about, but you also may have changes in your pitch variability. And so instead of coming up when you ask a question, hey, did you feed the dog? If you don't put that up there pretty high, it might not sound like a question to whatever you were targeting that towards. The word stress will change. And we do, in one of my classes, we do a lot of contrasting intonation kind of things where we really try to focus on word stress, because it's a really great way to get your point across without necessarily always turning up the volume. I mentioned the point about imprecise consonants and actually vowels, that's for that matter, but the consonants are probably where you're going to hear it. And when you don't make that precise, like if I'm making a T sound and I get a little, well, now you got some noise in that signal, and that noise actually makes it, makes it difficult to be heard, because the noise in the signal means that you can't hear the fundamental sound. Harsh voicing often comes from the vocal folds not particularly firing very well. So the vocal folds are coming together and they vibrate, and you push air through them, and it makes a vibration, and then you shape that vibration into speech sounds and communication. But if one of the vocal folds isn't firing symmetrically because of the Parkinson's, the asymmetrical nature of that, well, then maybe that air is going to come out in a really imprecise way. It's going to rush out on one side and not rush out on the other, and you're going to get that kind of harsh voicing that you hear about. Another factor that's incredibly common in Parkinson's is what we call bowed vocal folds. And the vocal folds are supposed to be tight, and you push the air through them, and it makes them vibrate, and they come in a nice mucosal way. But often in Parkinson's, with the weakness and the changes in the amount of effort or intensity, they open up a little bit, and so you don't have full closure of the vocal folds. And what that does is that means that A, your voice is automatically going to be quieter, it's going to be softer immediately, and then B, it's going to also add more air into that signal. It's going to make it more likely that your voice is going to be quieter sounding, because it's going to be competing with white noise, but that static sound that happens. So those are the basic components, and again, I really don't want to get too deep into the anatomy and physiology here. I just want us to understand what can go down, and more importantly, while the quiet voice is a big part of it, there can be a lot of other parts of communication that are affected by that same problem. So we asked again in the survey, when is your voice at its worst? And I think the first thing that we noticed is that fatigue and energy levels really have a huge impact on that. And so A lot of people talk about later in the day or when they're tired. People talk about morning or when they have fatigue. I like the one answer is like, when I have a glass or two of wine, well, that's going to slow you down a little bit. And then anytime that you're having some tiredness. And now if you are someone living with Parkinson's, it's pretty common to have a sleep issue that could lead to some daytime sleepiness. So that could be another factor as well. Then you have the time of day that we're talking about. And again, I think it's just something that you'll see when we get to what makes it better or when's the best time of day. You'll also see that for every person answering that night is their worst, there's plenty of people answering night is their best and morning's their worst. Then there's some other interesting factors that we notice, like when I have dyskinesia, and for those who don't know, dyskinesia is a side effect of the medications. When you take higher doses of usually Sinemet, the carbidopa levodopa, it can lead to some excess movements, and those can translate into your voice. And not so much in the voice not being able to be controlled, although that can be a factor, but a lot of times it has to do with control of the breath support and improving the articulators.
Mm-hmm. I was going to add in something, which is from a physiotherapist perspective. It's quite often that people don't recognize that when their balance is off, their voice is also challenged. So obviously we might not perceive it easily, but that means if I sit the person down, if I know that I'm talking with someone that has more challenge difficulties, and I tend to either lean against the wall, just giving some support, or sitting down, the voice automatically changes. So
very much so.
Just having notion of what makes it worse so that you can use it in our favor to help the person.
It's exactly the kind of risk factors that would be hopefully identified when you're working with a good clinician, a good therapist that knows that. Because if, again, in our classes, for the voice classes, we focus on having a nice open posture to mitigate some of the balance changes, but that doesn't always get rid of it. So it's exactly that issue that you wouldn't think of, but it certainly has an influence.
The other one that I would mention is, for example, if the person suffers from sleep attacks during the day, or, just fatigue that's really hitting, what I would suggest is, instead of having a conversation in a sitting position, is just alternating to the standing position, because that raises your alertness as well. And just transitioning from positions sometimes might influence and make the voice louder.
Sure. Yeah. Obviously, you have better breath support when you're standing as well. Okay. Well, then there's another one I want to kind of point out, because a couple of people talked about when I'm hurried or when I'm using my voice too long, so you get some strain. And again, I think that usually means that your voice is not being used in a healthy way all the time, or when it starts to wear down, it's kind of like when you can't be heard and then you go to some place where you have to be loud and you start shouting. Well, that's pretty abusive behavior, and so I suspect that might be part of this. And then there's social pressures. People talk about this a lot when they're going to a public event or they're going to a family gathering, and people are talking and you're trying to fit in. And so if you have a lot to say, but you don't have that much time because you kind of got to get your point across, or if there's a lot of activity, there's distractions, those can all have an influence on that. And then any time that you're feeling like the pace of the conversation is too fast. And I think part of that is something that you can train and get stronger at. And part of that is also making sure everyone around you knows, like, hey, this is not moving at a pace that I'm going to be a good part of this. So I think we need to bring it down to a normal level. And that usually works. You can advocate for yourself. People often ask me, what about medications? Did the medications help my voice? And actually, we took it back to you guys and we asked you, and just about half of you said either stays the same or improves. And only a few of you, just a handful, say it gets worse. I would say that the research is kind of in the same place. It can make things better. It can sometimes make things worse. It usually doesn't make it much worse unless you are someone, when you're getting to the top of your medication dose, maybe it's giving you some tightness. Maybe it's giving you some dyskinesia or something like that. And what the researchers have usually identified is that the movement-related parts of the voice and the lips and the teeth and the tongue and all the speech parts, they're probably going to get faster. And the voice may get louder. It doesn't always happen, but generally speaking, the intelligibility does not improve. And so it becomes a situation where certain aspects get better, but you don't necessarily have control over all of them. And so maybe you don't actually improve your ability to communicate, but you might have more facility. So it's probably, it's not hurting things usually. It's probably a good benefit. And I would say the same thing carries over to deep brain stimulation with a caveat, because DBS is supposed to provide a lot of the same benefits as your medication on the motor symptoms. That's the movement-related symptoms. That's that rigidity we're talking about, the stiffness and the speed of movement. That'll definitely benefit from DBS. And so those components in speech might benefit, except that they tend to put the electrodes there for subthalamic nucleus placement or STM placement. They tend to put that pretty deep into the brain in a place that's really close to what become cranial nerves, which are the nerves that control your lips and your teeth and your eyebrows and forehead and all that, all the facial nerve, all that stuff. And so sometimes when you have DBS, the stimulation can actually bleed into those structures, into those descending cortical bulbar fibers, cortical brain, bulbar meaning brain stem, and that's what becomes basically the cranial nerves. And so you might have some slurring or something like that. And so if you've had DBS and you notice a change in your voice, that might be something to address independently or alongside speech therapy, addressing the DBS programming along with some speech therapy, which has been fairly effective. LSVT published something in 2011 for that. So yeah, I'll leave it there for now just to say that that's something that can happen. I will say that in our survey, we only really had a couple people with DBS, and only one of them reported the issue, and that's good. And that just speaks to the fact that I think the programming is getting a lot better on that over the years. So we asked our folks, when is your voice at its best? And again, because it's Parkinson's, because anything can happen and everyone is individual and you have to look at them as an individual and make sure that you're addressing your individual needs. And I'm going to say the word individual about 30 more times today, but it's important. Again, people who said, oh, morning is my best time. Morning is my best time, early in the morning. Oh, well, no, for me, noon to afternoon. In the evening, after my third dose of Cinemet, that third Cinemet, carbidopa-levodopa. Okay, so that's all over the place with timing, but your job is not to say I fit the trend or I don't fit the trend. It's to understand where it works for you. You understand where you have your best times. And that's probably when you want to schedule appointments or phone calls or whatever like that. Now, other people mention that after a nap, and I would say that a little brief nap, 20, 30-minute nap, can be a great way to reset. Obviously, people talking about the medications. When I speak with intent, and that's from one of the branded approaches, we'll get into that a little bit with Speak Out. After the warm-up with John, we usually do a warm-up in every class we do, and that's great. And then at the start of the interactions with the voice. And again, the voice is best when you're starting, and it's getting worse as you're continuing the conversation. I suspect that you're not using your voice efficiently, or there's some type of problem that we need to address. And if you address it, it'll probably be a lot easier for you to talk for a longer amount of time without any real issues. Now, another thing, I'm going to demonstrate it by hydrating right now too. Don't neglect the impact of proper hydration. I think often all of us as adults don't drink enough liquids. I would say that I hear sometimes from my folks with Parkinson's, they don't want to drink so much because it means they have to jump up and go to the bathroom over and over again. And I'll just say, as a speech therapist, there's a happy medium, and you should probably be drinking more water than you think. It will help your medications work more efficiently. It will address some of the changes in blood pressure that people can deal with, the neurogenic orthostatic hypotension. And then as an SLP, you won't be running the vocal folds, which are very delicate pieces of skin. You won't be running them without enough hydration. So if you feel like the inside of your cheek or something like that, imagine that when it's dry, as you've been, out in dry weather, or you had your mouth open when you're sleeping. You don't want to be working them really hard. So that's why you want to have some hydration. And on the flip side of that, caffeine, coffee, tea, anything that's got Cokes, anything that's got caffeine in it, it's going to dry you out. So every time you have a cup of caffeine, you need to counteract that with a cup of water. And alcohol has the same influence with the additional changes in motor function. So if you're drinking anything but water or like a fruit juice or something like that, be sure that you are replenishing what you are taking away from caffeine and alcohol.
It's a question here that might be related to that. Is dry mouth a condition or medication-related issue?
Well, honestly, I think that dry mouth is not as common in Parkinson's, although anything can happen. There are times when it can show up, and certainly medications can exacerbate it. Typically, not the the dopamine replacing ones like carbidopa, levodopa, but if you're taking one that is an anticholinergic, we just don't use them very often, but you could have like amantadine has some anticholinergic properties, or you could be taking an old anticholinergic, or you could be taking something that's something that just slows your system down a little bit, and that might have an influence on. You might also, when you're sleeping, you might sleep with your mouth open, and that causes dry mouth. I want to be careful to say that all people with Parkinson's could be different. So you could have a different reaction. It's typically not a symptom of Parkinson's per se. Actually, more people, what I know, tell me that they have a runny nose or a lot of it's going down their back of the drip, like postnasal drip. Okay, now I really want to talk a little bit about the best exercises. Before I get into that, I want to break down what people said would be what they would hope to get out of the speech therapy. So if you could get any benefit you wanted, if your exercises could help you do one thing, what would it be? At the very top of that list, if you look at there with 12 out of half the people, being more easily heard in conversations, especially group conversations. I think that's a big one. I think groups represent not only a volume issue, you have to be louder because there's a lot of background noise, but there's also a lot of fast movement. And this is one of the weird things I've noticed is that when I do speech therapy with somebody and they get easier for them to be louder, easier for them to be able to project, that helps them break through in those conversations, but it also helps them not focus on the mechanics of producing speech and allows them to be more involved but be more present because they're not focused on like, oh, I have to do this and I have to have here and I have to be. It's like once they're stronger, then they can just focus on I have a point to make here, and I'm going to get in there when I need to be in there.
I was going to just comment that there's a role here for teaching as well, raising awareness to the people that we interact with, because it's not only for the person with Parkinson's to change these type of environments. The people we interact tend to talk more if the person has more speech problems. This is something that I observe in groups that I give. So the more voice problems that the person has, the quieter he is, the less people interact, the more talkative the other ones become. So it's like there's always a race to see who can talk more, and that person's always losing. So and what happens here? We have to raise awareness for this. Maybe in a Parkinson's setting, it's pretty easy because we just highlight the problem and say, guys, give space for everyone to talk. And we kind of control the environment, right?
Yeah, it's a sympathetic audience.
I would just say raise awareness because everyone here obviously is adults, and we just try to make people just a little bit more friendlier.
But you can take that out to the community a little bit and pick environments that don't quite have as much noise. Maybe a huge dinner with a bunch of people is not as great as two people across from you at the booth. And the booth is great because it can reflect noise back to you. They're really a good, ideal environment. And then, also just maybe training, especially if you have a care partner or a spouse, getting them to also like, hey, let's my family's terrible at this. We're all getting that in. And sometimes we feel it like, oh, it seems awkward, so let's talk more. And it's like, oh, now you just made it worse, right?
That's a good point. I actually had someone say that today. It's like people feel the need to always be filling up the space, like as if they were afraid of silence. And so, which if the person takes longer to initiate a conversation, he always loses. Is an interesting comment here. Is trying to speak faster a good thing, not only with intent?
Yes and no. I mean, it's you'll know it when you get there when it gets too fast, because if you're going so fast that you can't control the articulation, obviously if you're talking slower, although if you look at kind of machine learning or you start looking at models where they're taking a one feature of speech, what you'll see is not so much about rate of speech, although that's a number of syllables per minute or something like that. It's also the amount of pauses. And sometimes those pauses help not only you get resituated so you're staying focused and saying what you want to say, it also helps the listener stay refocused. So getting faster is helpful when it makes you feel more natural or sound like who you used to sound like. But it's not helpful at all costs if you're starting to lose clarity or you're just try to get your word in no matter what. It's like that. It's almost like when we do some of the boxing classes. If you get too fast, people, the movement gets real small. And it's like, no, I want big movements, and then we'll speed those up. I want good, clear speech with intent if you're doing speak outs, but then you can speed it up. Is that fair?
I would imagine like be fast to get in.
Yeah.
And then take ownership of the time.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. I'm here now.
Now you're going to hear me.
Yeah, I like that. That's good. Okay. Well, so yeah, other ones in here, and this is almost like a list that I could almost draw off the top of my head, not having to repeat myself, feeling more confident when I speak, sounding like myself. Boy, I hear that one a billion times. And then people talking about being able to talk longer without feeling tired. That person who wrote that, those 7 people, if you haven't worked with a speech therapist, they can definitely do something for that. Because I think if you can strengthen those muscles, that'll take a lot of that off the plate. Not all of it. You're still going to have fluctuations and times when the meds aren't doing what they're supposed to. That's all real, and I'm not minimizing that. And then coping with distractions or communicating by doing 2 things, that kind of stuff, or being on the phone. Those are things that we spend a lot of time working on with dual task and with mimicking your daily activities. And so you can definitely address that. And again, if the voice part is stronger, then those components will be easier to manage because you're not having to take part of your attention and divide it and focus on being loud enough and speaking with intent.
Mm-hmm. Before John goes into the interventions, just getting some questions here. Decaf copy should be okay? Just okay before we do it.
Sure. Yeah. I think taking the caffeine out should make it less of a diuretic, but you probably still might need to drink a little bit of water just to get around that a little bit, but not as much as if you drank Jolt. Do you remember Jolt Cola? Jolt Cola has like more caffeine than a cup of coffee, or energy drinks. You'll want to hydrate, but I think decaf's a good way to look at it. So sure. And probably better for your nighttime sleeping routine as well.
Mm-hmm. And following just another question that's here is the goal of going into specific goals that you want to improve so that we can achieve improvement in daily activities, and the suggestion that maybe we need help to be able to identify, okay, so which problems am I dealing with? And we mentioned the assessments before. And so there is, Steve here had not had very good experiences with assessments. And I thought maybe here before you go into, if you want to just.
Sure. And I'm reading through it. If you have not gotten a speech evaluation that has made it better for you to communicate, then I have to wonder if they're getting to your goals. What are your communication problems? Then if you think you don't have a problem and a speech therapist says, oh, you have a problem, that actually happens a little bit because there's a little bit of a calibration issue. But if you're saying, hey, I'm having problems at work, or I'm having problems when I'm trying to talk on the phone, or my kids aren't hearing me as well, or something like that, usually it's your spouse. The kids usually have better hearing. But then maybe you need to get a second opinion or to get it somewhere else, because when we're doing your evaluation, obviously I got my decibel meter and I got my timer, and we're doing that kind of stuff, the old school measurements. But then we're really getting into where your goals are, and then also when you're communicating under duress, under some cognitive load. That's usually when I can have a lot of people who can turn on, and I can be extra good, and I'm turning them on my radio voice, and I'm fantastic. And then I put them into a little bit of a cognitive challenge, and all of a sudden they get back to, oh, I want to take the I-95, or they get into there, I'm thinking what the answer is, and I get quiet. I will say this, that you should feel like when you're done, you have an action plan. And now I'll be, especially when I worked in skilled nursing environments, often I would have a situation where I would evaluate someone, and I would do just enough an evaluation to understand whether or not they were going to be qualified for services. And then I would go right into treatment, because I'd want to make them feel the benefit of our work so that they would be able to see the value and want to move forward. And that sometimes maybe that might be another way. If I'm just sitting here with a clipboarding, oh, very interesting, you got a white coat on or something, that's not so great. Now, getting back to the voice and the speech exercise components, I've broken it down into 3 parts, okay? At the very first part of it, we need to talk about strengthening and conditioning. Voice is a muscle. And it can get atrophied, and we can have the bowed vocal folds that I mentioned, and you could lose breath support, and maybe other factors are getting involved in that as well, along with fatigue. And so you should be trying to get those components as strong as possible. That'll give you your best chance for tackling other things related to cognition or communication or whatever else you're dealing with. And it'll also make it just easier for you to communicate day to day. And so again, luckily, we happen to have some what I call branded approaches, meaning these are companies that were founded and came up with an approach. And actually, in the case of LSVT Loud, it's a protocol, which means you do it the same way every time. And they have very good evidence. LSVT in particular has level 1 evidence. That means it's called a randomized, double-blinded controlled study. And double-blinded is the hard part in rehab. In the world of rehab, double-blinded means you have to train me as a clinician in a sham protocol, in a sham therapy. That means it's hard because I know everything. So if you train me in a sham, I'm like, I'm not gonna do that. And then you have to have me do therapy, thinking I'm giving you the real therapy, and then we have to compare it with someone who got the real therapy. And LSVT did that by training a bunch of student clinicians, as they were founded at a university in University of Colorado Boulder, and so they did that, and they trained them and got actual level 1 double-blinded evidence, and that's very rare. I don't think you're going to find that in many places. They've been around for like 40 years, and then in the early 2000s, they had a competitor, just another version of speech therapy called Speak Out. The person who was mentioning speaking with intent, that's where they're coming from. And what's interesting about that is it's not quite as much evidence, but they've innovated some cool ideas that we've all taken now, like group classes and using certain cognitive load. And then I'd say other approaches, again, I hope that a speech-language pathologist that's working in Parkinson's is bringing in other things that they've learned and adding it to the mix. I use a lot of resonant voice therapy myself. Dr. Bertolini's work out of University of Pittsburgh. I learned vocal function exercises. We actually do a version of them sometimes in my classes. Pitch-limited voice therapy is actually a Dutch innovation. And I haven't used it as much, but it's another way. So you try to keep track of things and you use the approaches. Do you have a question you want me to look at?
Yeah. So you want to read the question?
Okay. Yeah. What did Parkinson's trained SP use additional tools outside of a decibel meter and a timer? Are there tools they should be using to help patients be more aware of their ability for appropriate care? Mm-hmm. Well, I think that we've had a real explosion in technologies, and like you have tools that you can use. Like I used an app. We're talking about pitch limited voice therapy. I use the voice trainer app from the Dutch. I just disabled the pitch partner because I don't care about that, but I use the decibel meter on that as a way of letting you see it when you're working with it. And then there are tools that actually go a little deeper into that and use it's more complex and advanced calculations to provide certain quality indexes. I don't want to out someone, but I met someone who works at a major clinic by a doctor that we all have heard of. And we're talking about this. We're like, we're doing therapy and what we're using. And a lot of times they may use a couple basic instruments, but they're not breaking out the big guns technology in their room very often because they're just trying to find what the functional problem is and increase it. So they might not even do much more than a decibel meter and a stopwatch. And I do that quite often when it's first getting started, and then I'll add in the assessment and maybe some of the machine learning tools. It's not necessary, though. You don't have to. Yeah.
Additional tools seems to mostly be distractions than anything else.
Yeah. And that's another problem is that... Yeah, well... I'm very tech friendly, but I'm also quite aware that sometimes when you have a technology and you get a shiny toy, then it's like, oh, we're all just going to look at the shiny toy over here. It's like, no, we come back. We're doing therapy. We're working on including your voice here. So shiny object syndrome can be a real problem if you get too much tech in there. I'll be honest that I've been in a couple startups where we've tried different things, and what we found is the best is things that can capture it in the background. So what they call ambient capturing of that. I think that does the best for everyone because then I can focus on being a clinician and a human being and interacting with you, and you can focus on trying to communicate the way you used to, and we don't have to get too distracted with shining lights and flashing buzzards. But they do provide, some of those tools do provide things that I can't hear. Well, I guess I can hear them, but I can't put into quantifiable words, and so that's where they become valuable. And again, I'm not going to get too far afield here, but I just had a publication accepted in one of the journals of movement disorders clinical practice where I basically outlined all of those voice as a biometric machine learning approaches. And I think that's coming, and that'll be used in clinic before you know it, but hopefully in a very background way. And it's not taking our eye out the ball of improving communication. What is the LSVT program and what are its goals? And yeah, you want to say about it?
I was going to say, so throughout the presentation, we are integrating the questions that people had on the surveys. Hopefully this one is probably already answered. Huh?
Very much. I mean, again, the only thing I'll push back on it is it outdated? And I don't think that's a fair way to characterize it because, again, they do a lot of research. They publish very frequently, several times a year, always publishing innovative stuff. And what I'll say is that the concepts are solid, but maybe you will modify them to your needs. And so I always am really careful, and I love Dr. Raymond, I love Dr. Fox, I love all the people in that program. I don't do LSVT the way I don't do their protocol, so I don't call it LSVT when I'm doing it, just because I have changed it. But I don't want to say it's outdated. I do quite the opposite. They're on top of their research. Typically speaking, LSVT's main gain is intensity. Loud ah, we're doing this loud ahs, and the highs and the lows are light. You do that 4 days a week for 4 weeks. Sometimes you extend it, and it's intensive, and you're working hard, and you're doing strengthening, and that's valuable. Now, we know that loud ah has been helpful before LSVT came along, but they really dialed in on like, no, you got to push them the way a physical therapist is going to push people, and that strengthening doesn't just help strengthen the vocal folds, but it also recalibrates your personal impression, because what typically happens is people don't understand due to a natural course of Parkinson's how much effort. There's a sensory mismatch. And so what they think is, I'm talking the way I always have, is actually a lot quieter and a lot more difficult to hear. And so their approach is going to do that high intensity exercise with the intensive warm up with the ahs and the highs and the lows, where you're going to go, ah, and hold it for as long as you can, and then go from low to high and high to low, and I won't demonstrate that here. They have these functional phrases, which are always fun. They're 10 things that you say every day. Maybe it's something, I love it when someone has a dog, because they can use something to call the dog, and if they do it well, the dog will come to them. And if they have an older dog, even better, because the dog usually doesn't have very good hearing when they get older. So you use those phrases as kind of like a carrier phrase, and then they have a hierarchy, and this is probably where I start to really diverge from them, where they start with words, and you're using words with the right level of effort, and you're using small phrases, and then longer phrases, and then sentences, and it's very hierarchical, and I usually bypass that by adding in dual task. But again, they publish frequently. They're kind of why we're here. I think they first came out in the late 90s, early 90s, I'm sorry, late 80s. So they've been around. This other approach here, the speak out, is very similar with the intensity, not quite as intensive. So they do only a couple times a week. I think when they started out, it was a slightly different amount of intensity, but they modified it, just did their training again, did a refresher in January. They use this may, me, my, mo, moo. So it's five vowels, although some of those are diphthongs. And it's funny, I first learned that with resonant voice therapy. So I use the Dr. Bertolini's approach, and I use it with different consonants, but that's another part of their warm-up. They do the same ahs and highs and lows, because we know those work. And then what they've done is they've actually built a workbook. And again, this tells me they're clinicians. Now, this is the one for the loud crowd, but they're group one. But they'll ship this out because it's a nonprofit. They'll ship it out, and you'll have a book. And so when you're working with somebody, you'll be like, okay, we'll do this pages. We'll do the exercise. Next day, I want you to do this one and this page. And I'll see you the day after that. And I'll just say, speaking as the working clinician, it's like the worst thing I can do is pull out a pad of paper, like do 2 of these and 1 of those and that, and I'll see you on Tuesday. It's like when I used to teach music many, many years ago, and it's like that was the kiss of death. Now, like, no way is someone going to be like, oh, let me see if I can decode what John wanted me to do. No, it's got to be that easy. So I like that workbook.
Mm-hmm. There's an interesting question here. A phrase like bring an apple and a pear, in which linking the sounds is possible, maybe considered a functional phrase?
I would say that the functional phrases from a perspective of a clinician is you want to come at it with something you're going to say every day, so you can know, like, hey, what's for breakfast, or how was your day, or you want to watch the news, or the one that always got me when we do the training. It's cocktail time, so apparently somebody at 5 o'clock, it was time to have. It's 5 o'clock somewhere. So phrases that you're going to use on a regular basis. That's why I also love it when someone has a dog, because you can use something with the dog and it becomes a nice interaction, and the dog's not going to try not to hurt your feelings. He either heard you or didn't. So those kind of things where you're using articulatory precision, the teeth and the tongue, those things are very interesting. We actually, in one of my classes, a gentleman that had a nice background in music, and he was talking about patter songs that he was using in kind of like a professional singing content.
So we have Gabriella that asks, reading aloud and singing or even entertaining ourselves with tongue twisters. Do these activities help?
For sure. And tongue twisters or reading, I like reading materials that are kind of coming and going. So now everyone has a phone, so you could just read right off of your phone, or you can read some mail. And again, not just reading it so I'm reading with clarity and I'm talking, but also trying to add a little bit to it. If you can add the pauses and add some of the intonation, it makes it a lot more compelling and easier to listen to, and also makes more an interesting conversational partner. Tongue twisters for sure, especially if you have an issue with articulation, if that's something that you're dealing with, sure. Moving along here, I will say that in addition to this voice and speech side of this stuff, I think that that's important, but I also think that you should not neglect posture and mobility. And again, this gets back to some of the initial stuff we were saying, where whatever is happening in Parkinson's globally is going to affect structures that could affect speech, and that could be your diaphragm, that could be your rib cage and the costal muscles. And if you're leaning forward, you have a kyphotic posture, as we call that, a forward-leaning posture. Not only does that influence how much breath support you get, but it also means that you're putting your head in a really awkward position, so you're losing some of the eye contact, and we use the eyes for a lot of nonverbal communication. And then we also have a situation too where when you're talking to someone, people are actually looking at your mouth more than you think. That's part of the issue when we had all the masks on during COVID. It really cuts intelligibility. It doesn't just make you quieter, but we capture a lot of information from that visual part of that. And so I think that's important to add in. What we do is some basic breath works where we're opening up, and we're just stretching, and we're really focused on mobility. Maybe we'll focus on one side, stretching on the anterior serratus. And because people with Parkinson's, typically the Parkinson's starts on one side and becomes bilateral over time, you probably notice those asymmetries as we're working on them. So it becomes a good way to bring awareness to, oh, this side needs a little more help. I have to push a little bit harder. Another thing we'll do often is we'll bring in some poles. Most of us have walking poles. We use them when we're doing Nordic walking, or maybe where people live in parts of the world where you can hike, and we use them to give us a little bit of proprioceptive information to help us stretch. I'm not exercising, I'm not strengthening myself. I'm more giving myself better stretching so I can feel it. It's concepts that I got when I got certified in Pilates many years ago. So I try to replicate those. And I think that it's something that if you're not getting that, you should be adding that, and a physical therapist can add this too. It doesn't have to be a speech therapist.
It's important for the team to integrate.
Always.
Like if I start working out with someone, and the first thing you do is communicate with the person. It's like, how's your day? How did your weekend go? And the person starts struggling. It's like, wait, before we start, let's just warm up our voices. What exercises do you usually do in your speech therapy to warm up your voices? And then the person shows it to me. So it's just reinforcing the homework, I think, is a good way to integrate it into physiotherapy land.
For sure, and those kind of communications, and also just getting from your speech therapist the way that they should be, maybe the way you want them to project, and then vice versa. If there are things that the physical therapist is focused on with respect to processes for getting out of the chair, I'll use that in cognitive load, especially in facilities, not so much a one-on-one. Okay, now functional practice. I'm just going to say that this is where, again, I think we start to diverge, because the best exercise to improve communication is communication. Using your voice is important. Notwithstanding the person that says their voice gets tired the more they use it, that we got to get to that problem. But once you're feeling stabilized, it's helpful to add in cognitive challenges. Dual tasks not only let us mimic day-to-day interactions, but also extend them. You're overtraining them. It's like resistance, like dumbbells. but for the cognitive part of it, because the speech is one thing, the voice is one thing, but language and communication encompasses all these pieces. And so by doing an activity where we're doing some movement while we're doing some voice stuff here, it's been pulled up here. So we're finding the internal words and we're trying to figure it out. That's easy. That's not so focused on the movement side of it. But then we'll have people doing, again, these are all just little cognitive activities, but because we're doing them in a group class, everyone's mic's on, we're asking people to be able to project in a way. And then sometimes we'll have them leading it out like that. Now, another one I can do sometimes, I always try to get some input from a physical therapist, is I'll try to have a movement that I incorporate with it. And just having the movement alongside the physical activity makes it more difficult. I don't like to freelance on this, but you know, I'm well involved with a physical therapist, so it helps. But so I'd probably be real careful about standing. If someone had a balance issue, I might do it in a chair.
Yeah, the main goal is to be able to fight against the interference that occurs when we move and talk at the same time. We communicate.
Yeah.
So if you are in an exercise world or you're doing a balance exercise, like I was saying, it could interfere with the voice. So if I integrate voice while I'm doing a balance exercise, I'm capacitating the person to have less interference on daily activities where this will be required. Sure. So by putting in simple movements while we are talking, it's the same goal. It's just to be able to reduce that interference.
Keep going with that concept is that, again, the goal is to build the strength and then add the complexity on top of it so that you can manage it when you encounter it out in real life. Now, that is the flip side of that, is that someone here is saying, hey, all I got was cognitive and executive strategies instead of vocalizing, despite my requesting that. And I'll say that the first thing I would ask you is, when you're talking with your therapist, maybe you could ask them a little bit about what was your goal. I mean, why are you asking me to do all these things? What is the role here? I'm not able to communicate with enough volume. What is this cognitive part of it? And they might tell you, well, this is what I see, and this is what I'm worried about, or this is what I want to help improve. But you should be able to have a back and forth. And if you haven't had that back and forth, that's where it starts. You know, anybody can have a better or worse relationship with a clinician. So, you know, maybe that's part of that. And maybe you want to find someone that's more your match. But I wouldn't start there. I would start with, why are we focusing on this? What would I do to get back towards the things that I think are a problem? And then you guys can come to the middle of that. And that's really should be, when we start talking about the evaluation, that's really what the evaluation is to start. What are your goals?
One way I look at this is by using the cognitive exercises, which should be obviously to the level where it does not frustrate you, so that this is not perceived as burden, is one way to use your voice. So you're actually communicating, because there's only so much you can talk with your therapist, right? Well, you could brainstorm and philosophy about lots of things. But I think adding in the cognition allows you to have that vocalization as well,
yeah,
because
absolutely.
you are using it for that end. Yeah. But I think here is a mismatch between perceiving what I'm working on. And I can give you an example. For example, in balance, some people will like, the worst thing for me is balance. And if I'm doing an exercise where I'm doing, imagine stepping, or I don't know, maybe dancing, and I do not explain to the person that that is actually the best exercise you can do for balance, that means there's a mismatch between what the person wants to achieve and what he thinks he's doing in therapy. So wait a minute, I want to work on my balance, and here I am doing stepping or something that he might not relate it. So sometimes it's a question of really discussing this and understanding where you're coming from. But I actually had this also with one of my patients that told me I'm doing too many cognitive exercises, and I believe, based on that experience, that it might be because it's just too much. It's already getting to a level of frustration. And so that's why.
Oh yeah, we could do that's another one we should talk about. What these should be doing is challenge you in a way that helps you progress. But if you're feeling like you're not doing well and it's frustrating or it's anxiety inducing, I think that's a misnomer in dual tasks. You know, harder is not better. Better is better. I want to say the most important thing I think that has changed in the last 15 years or so is that we've really figured out that you don't do this therapy and then you go off for 6 months and come back. It's not like the dentist. You really have to have a strategy for maintaining and extending those gains. So you have to do something that continues to use your voice daily or weekly so they can do that.
And I was going to combine it with this question, which is what kind of exercises work for someone who cannot do the exercise that was shown in the first video, the Maimamu and so I think now John will probably give lots of examples that will answer your question.
Sure. Yeah. No, I mean, I think after you've done your course of treatment, both of those programs, LSVT and Speak Out, actually have kind of a branded class. And it's really, the caveat is for people that have done the rehab ahead of time. So it's not for anybody. But those are programs that you do at least once a week, and it allows you to get some practice, and it also allows you to interact with the clinician. And then if there's a problem, maybe you could wait for a little touch-up. So those are both nice. Speak Out kind of innovated it, and then Loud for Life to come on strong, and they're both good. ANOVA, who with our partners for today's program, underwrites a program that I do with voice, speech, and communication. So it's a weekly class. It's live. It's online. We don't record it. We try a lot of different stuff. And so the person who asked them, can I join a group? Here's one you can join right off the bat. These ones you can join if you have done LSVT or Speak Out, and that clinician will let you through. But this one is one that you can do. There are probably other ones out there, but I'm staying in the ANOVA family. And I tried to make the fastest of all videos. I think I turned the sound on just so you did. So what we'll do in a class like that is we'll start with basic breath work, like I mentioned. We got the polls. We're warming up our voices. And then we're going to basically do the things that are going to be some of the functional components for improving your posture. And then from
saying this can be done sitting down also in line with what the person was asking before.
Now, when we do these collides, like they get LSVT folks, like we were mentioning before, I always do them with movement. I don't do me, me, mo. I do the three primary sounds, the three primary vowels. And then we're doing some different exercises. This is us counting, and when the colors change, we change which direction we're counting. It's real simple, but exercises like that are pretty available. Here's one where we're doing more movement, and we're basically reading out loud and then doing some sequencing or decision making. And this is a way to, again, to extend it. We've done some of the basic stuff. This is an exercise with a straw, semi-occluded vocal tract therapy. I just finished a chapter for Springer, and I saw a great Japanese review on this. We'd end up with a little bit of music. And so there's a lot of things in each class, and I think that's something that I would try to find wherever you're going, which is you want a diversity of challenges. And also the beauty is that if there's something that you don't love, it's going to be gone in 5 minutes. Maybe you need it anyways, but it's gone in 5 minutes. Okay, so other things that you can do externally are choirs. And now I wouldn't replace working with an SLP with a choir, but they do have some good data, and it's some fun way to do it. And Sonia Gao at the ANOVA Parkinson's and Movement Disorder Center gave me 2 local opportunities for people who are living in Northern Virginia. One of them's through the ANOVA Loudoun Hospital Rehab Center, and another one's an organization in the D.C. area. And I just put that information in there. They'll be on the slides.
Is it free or need insurance?
Oh, yeah. Well, for the classes, the online classes, they're all online. They're all free. You don't pay for those. When you do therapy is a skilled service, so that's something you get your doctor to write a prescription, and ostensibly, if you have Medicare, that gets covered by that. But this class in particular, this one I was just showing you here, that's free, and I encourage you to join us. We just had our class today, and it's we've been going now for almost 5 years. It's a lot of fun. I really enjoy it. Now, if you can't get to a choir, doing choirs online is very difficult, but I keep trying. Karaoke is a really interesting way to maybe extend that if you want to do some singing, and there are apps for it, but I found that I can search for any song I like and the word karaoke on YouTube, and you'll find a version, and it'll have the words scrolling up in real time, and it's super easy. The apps might give you some more capabilities, but they usually cost money. That's why I'm not recommending them. So that's an easy one that you can use. I think using speech recognition has finally had its moment. I've been using speech recognition since the 90s. I had a very serious injury that ended my ability to interact with the computer, and I use it all the time. And you can use it on a smart speaker. You can use it on your phone with Siri or Google. You can dictate. All of the major computers now have native for free dictation for dictating emails. I dictate texts all the time. And so that's something. And then actually Inova a couple of years ago, we partnered with them and we did a 4-part series that's still available on their website. So if you're scared or you haven't tried it or you want to get into that, it's free. All the videos are there. All the slides are there. And if you want to try out speech recognition, just a couple more opportunities. Improv is having a moment and there are more of those showing up. You could go to one that's done by a local arts center or, community theater kind of environment, or if you're lucky enough, there might be one nearby. Toastmasters, and you go in and you do certain kinds of speeches and you get graded by them, and they're really kind of fun. And then any kind of volunteering or other what I call social prescription, going to a church, doing something there. Any opportunities, not only is it beneficial because you're using your voice and you're working with people that are probably also good people and compassionate, but you also get good feelings out of that. And boy, Gavin Mogan's the one who really hit me to that. This person living with Parkinson, showing that when you make yourself feel good, it influences your Parkinson in a very positive way. And he couldn't say any better than I can, so I won't steal his thunder.
I think I'd go into the groups and say, I'm here to work on my voice. So you're cueing them to, you should allow me to talk.
And Sonia says, IPMDC does offer improv in Sterling on the 4th Thursday of each month. Of course, Sonia knows this. If anybody doesn't know Sonia Gao at Inova Parkinson's and Movement Square Center, she is the pulse of your region, and she knows everything, and she knows everyone. And if you're having issues finding something, please get in touch with her or look on their website first. Hit that all here. Oh, of course, it's free. Yes, that's Sonia's improv class. So exercise to increase volume and loudness. Can you outline a small set of exercises? What can I do? I put these all in the same one. And I'll just say that I chopped up one of our classes and optimized the audio, and it's available on for just by itself. It's just the voice and speech component. There's a QR code for people who are nerds and know how to use your phone and take a picture of it. You can go to this Rebrandly. This will be on the slide, so if you don't get this fast enough, don't worry. You'll be able to check it out later on or send me an email. And it's just the basics of the physical components. It doesn't have the cognitive things. But that's the least you need to do, I think. If you want to maintain your voice after therapy, some basic exercise a couple times a week. What are some exercises, facial and breathing, in addition to voice, which can be done in addition to actual sound exercises? I'm not always in a place where I want or should be heard. I've heard this before. I'll give you a couple options, and then I'll talk about maybe a way to get around this problem, because I think you can't underestimate the power of working on your voice. You can work with a breath training device, and probably the one that I'm more partial to is that EMST 150, although I use the 75. I use the easier one. Gives me more room. And basically, this is what's called a threshold trainer, which means you have to hit a certain threshold or a certain amount of pressure. The valve opens up, and you get a training that way. Now, this is not without noise, but it really has a great body of evidence. It's got a lot of data out of Florida for Parkinson's, not just for speech, but also for swallowing. And I even saw one when I was doing that textbook chapter on drooling. The other option are resistance trainers, and the breather's probably the most famous one, although there are other ones out there, and that uses baffles to provide resistance. And my only concern with those devices is that you can't get a clear read on how much effort you're using, and if you use not enough effort, then you're basically, the air just leaks out the sides, and so that's not as valuable. They do make a little manometer, a little measuring device that you can buy in line. They're not charging a crazy amount of money for the EMST. They've done a lot of great research. Christian Sapienza has published for more than a decade. So I guess I push people towards that one.
Someone had asked about that.
Great, yeah. Okay. And the breather's not bad, but I like the EMST better. With respect to facial masking, that's lowered or reduced facial expression. It's a very common issue in Parkinson's. Sometimes you see hypomimia is a more common term. Older term, masked faces, if you're reading older journal articles. And I'll just say that direct evidence for the benefits of facial masking, it's not very strong evidence, but it certainly can't help. If you perceive benefit, it's worth doing. I would just say, though, like a lot of stretching, those kind of things, you put it within your other exercises. So you can do exercises that strengthen by doing facial movements. I'd say that the research on general benefits from aerobic exercise especially cardio, and also from intensive speech therapy seems to have more evidence. If you're going to do stuff like that, I would say not just smiling like in ways that you don't want to show on Facebook or, like with your pushing out like that. I think you do better when you push against, you provide some resistance. If you're going this way, you're closing against it. Or the one that I really like is coming up against this, because really facial masking is most apparent in the eyes. It's where you see it. Now, I would say that I don't focus on this. We've tried it in classes at some times, and it just doesn't seem to really make enough difference for me to really take time out of the class to do it. The main, again, if you perceive benefits, I'm not shooting you away from it. But I would say the first thing I would do would be to observe yourself. So go into a bathroom and check yourself on the mirror and see what you're putting out there, and then play with the exercises, pace yoga kind of exercises. You can do anything like that. If you have a phone, you can do it that way as well. But a lot of times I've been more effective helping someone find a position that they can kind of reset themselves to, and then they're ready to communicate, especially if they're on Zoom calls or something like that. I remember the one guy did this thing with his eyebrow, and once he knew, they're like, okay, it's go time. And it's like, that's great. Especially that guy was on camera a lot too. I put this in here just because as a speech therapist, this is the most common question in the world, and I think it's hilarious, but it's very common. And a person said, my husband complains he can't understand me at all. My other family and friends have no problems. That's a different thing. And so they're wondering if their husband has a hearing issue. And I'll just say, maybe I'll steal this from Sonia, I don't do marriage counseling, but I will say that it's possible. As we get older, hearing loss is possible. And especially if you're having a situation where other people aren't seeming to do it, but he is, that's kind of a red flag. Now, it's within the scope of practice of a speech-language pathologist. If you're in a clinic with them, do a quick hearing screening, and there are also apps that will do that. And if you see the indication, the screening is not a test. It's not an audiology test. You see a problem, then I would get referred to an audiologist, not a hearing aid dispenser, not a salesperson, but an audiologist, and have them do a real assessment, and then they can help guide you towards things that might help that. Now, I will say that if you're living with Parkinson's, your voice may still be quiet. You could both have the problem. Like, he could be having hearing loss, and you could be having quiet voice, and the two of those make not a good solution. But yes, I just think it's so funny because it's like the old, it's a stupid common speech therapy joke. So.
Okay, so we probably go on to the final messages.
Yeah.
Just some questions here. Can speech therapy delivered virtual be equally as effective?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Yes, I think the research is showing that for speech, voice cognition, there's a growing body of evidence. Georgia Malandraki, who was at Purdue for a long time, is now going to go to University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, which has a great, really interesting program. She's going to head that. She's been doing assessment of swallowing, so that's coming. But for now, for sure, voice, speech, cognition, absolutely. And maybe easier. Might be nice if you can get one session in, but I've done plenty of sessions where I've never seen person in person, because they're in California or something like that.
And then also, how quickly after diagnosis should they begin speech therapy?
Okay.
Would it be premature for someone in stage 1?
I think it's worth going in for an evaluation early on. It gives you a nice snapshot. If they capturing stuff with equipment, if they're doing a nice computerized testing of you, you'll have that. And what I'll say is that, especially with machine learning and some of the newer approaches that we're finding, the presence of speech problems are probably there a lot earlier than you expect. And if we can address them a little earlier, you can maintain it. And it's much easier to maintain function than it is to go back and repair lost function. And with Parkinson's, as opposed to someone with a stroke or something else like that, the function's there. You just got to turn it back up. There was a really fascinating study, and actually John Hopkins eventually made a corpus where we were using it for this machine learning approach, where they took celebrities who've been diagnosed with Parkinson's, and then they put their tools out there, and they were able to identify people with Parkinson's who maybe disclosed or learned that they had it in 1991 or something like that, and they could see it 5 years earlier just because of those tools. And I would say that means that it's probably there earlier. So it's not inappropriate. And if you don't have problems that you're seeing very significantly, that speech therapy will be like, great, see you in 6 months or a year.
And then Captain asks, could you say where patients can get information of the exercises of LSVT or speak out programs? Can we do them on our own? Oh, the material limited to the professionals.
Yes. Okay. Let me answer the last part first. Yes, that's something that you're going to have to get from a clinician. Both of those organizations, Speak Out and LSVT Global, have clinician finders. You just go to their website and then you dial in your zip code and it'll tell you who's nearby. And in the materials that I mentioned, that book, Speak Out is a nonprofit, and so they actually, when I register a new patient in the Speak Out program, I give them the information, and they ship the book to you, and you have it. And it's a nice approach. It's a nice way of doing it with a nonprofit. Again, I think it behooves all of you, especially because you have such an embarrassment of riches with ANOVA being right there. Get an evaluation from a pro. They'll help you identify. And of course, you could have swallowing or other things that are there too, and they'll see that and understand that there's something that needs to be addressed. After you do the treatment, or even if you don't and you just want to maintain your voice, have strategies for doing that. Do the online classes, do an improv group, do a theater thing, do something in the community and improve your ability to maintain that voice. And then avoid things that set you back. So like I said, the caffeine is one thing I'm mentioning, fatigue, understanding that the medication's wearing off may be influencing things, maybe influencing your energy levels. Understand whether sleep changes are influencing your ability to stay alert during the day. Those are things that you should be tracking, and a good clinician can help you walk through that a little bit.
I would try to do activities where you're away from your husband or wife so that you can have, because it becomes very comfortable when you have a partner that you don't have to make the effort to speak, but when you are alone, you have to talk.
That's very true. Well, and I like your thought about telling people when you go to, hey, I have Parkinson's and I'm part of my goal. I want to make sure. So if you can't hear me, you're not embarrassing me. I want to be working on this, and that's valuable. So I mentioned this before here. We have this program. If you live in the Northern Virginia area, we're coming to ANOVA in August, on August 2nd. This little link I put here is really a survey. We just want to understand what people's needs are. We always tailor to whoever's here, just like we did with the survey for this session today. And so I'll leave it there and just say that if you would like to join us, they're a lot of fun. Josefa and I met in 2011, and this is what we used to do live in the days before the internet. And so it's always fun. We all get together and do one live. It's a great time. Please join us. I know we went a little bit over. If anyone has any questions that we didn't get to, I'm happy to answer them.
You feel that something wasn't covered enough, please unmute and share it with us.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Louise. Yeah. Very good. Okay. Well, folks, thank you.
See.
Oh, yeah. Oh, Claudia. Yeah. Oh, is she giving us this was great, or would you like to talk? Oh, she gave this is great. Okay, good. Non-verbal communication, you would be amazed at how much we use it, but it's not just about the voice all the time. Okay. Take care, folks. Have a great one. And thanks for coming in. Have a good evening.